Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be joined this evening by Mr. Andriy Zagorodnyuk, ex-Ukrainian Minister of Defense and the head of the Center for Defense Strategies. So welcome to our show, Pan Andriy. Let's dive into the recent article about Ukraine's counteroffensive that caused a great stir. This is the Washington Post investigation into why it did not go as planned. Well, it's called why it failed. Basically, in a recent conversation, you mentioned that one of the reasons that Ukraine's counteroffensive did not go according to plan is because we are entering uncharted territory for which no doctrines exist. It's something that Western officials do not yet grasp, you said. And this recent Washington Post article, it delved into the divergences between Ukrainian and American defense officials. American military readers seem incredulous that months of detailed planning and provision of advanced NATO weaponry did not translate into the decisive counteroffensive that they anticipated, that they envisioned if their advice was followed. So let's take a look at the main accusations that they are leveraging against Ukraine. The US, for instance, was adamant that Ukraine should dedicate more troops to the south to achieve a breakthrough to the Azov Sea. And Ukraine, on the other hand, it insisted on attacking in three directions, having a three-pronged attack. So American officials believe this is one of the reasons that the offensive failed. What is your assessment?
Well, first of all, I haven't interviewed that many people as Washington Post did, so I cannot say that my personal information about the attitude in Washington D.C. or European Command is like theirs. So probably they have better information. I have heard from during that year, basically, I have heard certain pieces of information which was like confirming what I've read in the Washington Post myself. However, the level of like dramatism of those some of those accusations is rather new. So I didn't think that there were that like many differences. However, I can tell you from my personal knowledge and from the knowledge of the people who I deal with. And we, with the Center for Defense Strategies, constantly dealt with people in the States or people who dealt with people in the States. And indeed, there are some differences in opinions and probably differences of the approach. And I don't know how many of those will look at our interview, and that's going to change anything. But there are certain things which I definitely would correct or suggest to correct just based on our like months and already years of cooperation on this war and on a, let's say, previous Russo-Ukrainian war starting from 2014. We've been dealing with our allies like pretty much all the time. What is really a little bit strange is in this situation is that the lack of the US officials, US officers who were collecting information on a daily basis in Ukraine on actually being among Ukrainian soldiers and actually dealing with them, comparing to the ambition of their recommendations and some of their like strengths of their opinions. In order to be absolutely certain, about the operational decisions, you need to be in the theater operations. So, from my knowledge, maybe I'm mistaken, but there is no present U.S. officers of like general strategic level in Ukraine so far, and with that, you cannot know everything about the war. You just cannot. I mean, it's just impossible. So you need to be there. You need to ask questions. You need to get the answers on a sort of daily basis, and then operational environment to the extent that you may be possibly making a high quality plans and also high quality sort of gaming scenarios, because we also read in the paper that there's been like gaming sessions, like several, 8, I think. Question is that what assumptions been used? And it seems like the assumptions being used were a little bit far from reality, because as we have seen them later, many of them like went straight to hell, from the day two of the counteroffensive. And the last thing I would suggest we do is to say, well, the plan was good, the execution was bad, because then you can justify any plan like that. So for example, let me give you a civilian example. There was let's assume there is like a company, a startup or something like that, and they create a business plan, which is in military is a campaign plan. And then everything goes differently. So question is, who's wrong? And whether this is our implementation was wrong, or maybe a plan was theoretical, maybe a plan wasn't related to actual life. Maybe the assumptions were wrong, or maybe it was just calculated some way that it was purely theoretical. The fact that, and it's probably doesn't make sense to play this blaming game, because blaming game is never ends well. I mean, we still expect the militaries to work with each other. So those like accusations saying that, well, our purely theoretical plan, which we developed back in I don't know, Europe, it didn't work in Ukraine. However, we don't have anyone there. Probably it's not a wise course of action, as well as saying that, well, it's your plan. We weren't responsible for that. Well, if our troops weren't responsible for that, then probably why they approved it, why they didn't protest from the beginning and saying that no, you don't understand what you're talking about, guys. Like, basically this plan is off reality. So perhaps there are some miscalculations everywhere in that strategy, in that counteroffensive. But what does it mean now? Well, first of all, and that's the most important thing right now for all of our allies and for everybody, is that we should not get into the state of despair and state of disbelief and saying, okay, we don't know how to win. This is unwinnable war. We should quit. We should get out of this, and so on and so on. Because if this is the way how things will turn out, and I sincerely hope it won't, then basically the coalition is extremely weak. That sends a signal to everybody that the coalition is extremely weak, that people don't know how to win Russia, that people don't know how to win the wars, and essentially, this is not how the strong coalition behaves. A strong coalition makes lessons learned analysis, openly discusses the shortcomings, and saying, okay, we still need to win this war. We still need to, to deal with this enemy, and let's just build up a proper strategy. Let's see what went wrong, and let's make corrections. That's what the strong coalition does, and I sincerely hope that this is what we're going to do. We're going to sort of analyze the situation, see where the problems are, and then say, okay, fine, let's go and let's build it up. So basically, my biggest issue with the Washington Post article is that it kind of doesn't cover now what question, So basically, and that's why a lot of people in analytical community and in the journalist community and in a community of observers, because there's lots of people who are neither analysts nor journalists, but they are actively discussing everything, and they are tweeting a lot, and they are like, giving different kind of opinions everywhere, and so on and so on. So that sort of interested community, and we appreciate that community. I mean, that community created a lot of the positive vibe and the positive movement particularly in the beginning of the war. So it's important to send that message to this community that we should not be like defeatist. There's basically like saying, oh, that's it. No, because as we discussed, like there's been setbacks in every single major war in the history of the world. There are wars which ends up very quickly and something goes very, very fast. And there are a lot of wars like that in the history, but because there's some serious advantage of one side against the other side. And then there are wars which are take a long time. And in the wars which take a long time, there's been setbacks from probably from both sides during the history of this war. There's been massive losses which the Western coalition had in the Second World War, especially in the beginning, and there's been substantial issues with the in the wars in Afghanistan and in the wars in Iraq, and there's been people who couldn't answer where this war goes, how this is going to end, how it's going to finish, and so on and so on. And so we need to be strong. We need to be strong, and we need to be resolved, and we need to be confident that the collective power of the coalition is much, much, much bigger than Russia, and even Russia with Iran. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we need to read between the lines and see what some people actually said about this counteroffensive, particularly about the use of drones and the use of the other technologies. We need to just to understand and face that the technological landscape of this war, as we discussed in a previous interview, is changing. And it's changing, and this is irreversible movements. It's not like it depends on us. It's just happening, Right. And we need to catch that moment. We need to understand that trend, revise it, and not miss it. Because this counteroffensive, if you look again at the article or any other articles about that, it wasn't a surprise, which in many cases, you need to create the element of surprise in the offensive, because then your enemy is not ready. It wasn't a surprise at all. A direction was read long time ago by Russians. It wasn't they had a chance to prepare, but also as we discussed, the drone technologies, they amplified lots of the traditional, conventional, and old school solutions. For example, mining. It's not the mines which we had problems with. It's the drones which could attack the demining vehicles. That's what we had the problems with. And this article actually confirms that. If you remember, there's been some mention of that the drones were attacking those M58 Mikliks, and there's been a lot lost, like over the half lost in those battles. So people tried, but they encountered substantial problems. So based on that, we need to make conclusions, and we need to just to be resolved. And we need to remember this war will end up with the victory of one of the sides. Again, as we discussed before, there's no other way. So we just need to, push on and struggle through this, but eventually win.
We'll come back to the drones a little bit later. That's an extremely important point. But just a few more issues with the Washington Post article. For instance, one of the another accusation that the U.S. is levying against Ukraine is that they wanted the counteroffensive to start in April, and they were pushing Ukrainians to do it, and the Ukrainians were holding back because they said that their troops were inadequately trained and did not have the proper support. What is your assessment? What would have happened if Ukraine did start going on the offensive in April, as the U.S. insisted?
Well, there's been a number of disagreements, indeed, and we need to, again, analyze and make lessons learned. For example, the two drastic disagreements, these were like timing, indeed. And with the timing, I remember very well that from my dealings with the military, that's like basically first-hand knowledge, that indeed a lot of the equipment came without the technical support, without spares. And again, lots of equipment came not from the United States. They came from Europe. And there's been a lot of cases, and we have just one tip of the iceberg of that in the public domain, as an interview of General Gavrilov, which was at that time the Deputy Minister of Defense, who gave a very short interview about just saying some very, very scaring things about the state of some equipment which came. But in reality, it was much bigger problem. It's just like our Ministry of Defense didn't want to bring it up like that publicly, because they still expect it needs to be resolved. But a lot of equipment came in not a working condition, and it needed to be repaired. And some equipment went straight to the spare parts. Basically, it was cannibalized for spares because it was in such a poor condition that couldn't even work. If you read that interview of Gavrilov carefully, I mean, he says about that like very, very carefully, not to kind of create a big stir. But in reality, this problem was that in some points of time, half of the equipment which was arriving from some of our partners weren't working. Like it was just not in a working condition. Also, there's been a major issue with the spare parts and the technical support. Because in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, there's been a lot of Western contractors who serviced the equipment. They opened up service stations and created warehouses and so on. As you know, Western contractors did not work in Ukraine, so they couldn't open that. At the same time, Ukrainian contractors couldn't master that very quickly. And again, I'm not in accusation mode, because it's been also an equal sort of probably responsibility from our side, because we could have managed that better. We could have set up quicker the warehouses. We could actually dispatch them quickly, keep them closer to the front line, and so on and so on. So it's again, it's definitely not something which we should say that these people were like to blame, but the issue persisted. That's true. Also, I have to say that, for example, in Europe, the US created a special center for sort of flagging the maintenance issues and quick responding to these maintenance issues, and that center was very effective. I'm not sure. I don't know if it still operates. Just I didn't, wasn't like checking out, but it operated for quite a long period of time, and it was very effective. So there's been some kind of a some attempts and some actually successful attempts to deal with that. I know UK companies set up some sort of hotlines, for the service people to kind of check with some maintenance issues. But I think that to say that was all enough and that was all 100% effective, I think it wasn't. And so yes, there's absolutely was a problem with this. A second kind of a major disagreement is basically the lines of attack. So the lines of the directions of counteroffensive. As we know, there's been a expectation of US, for example, US commanders just to concentrate everything on the south, on sort of Robotino kind of a direction to Melitopol. At the same time, there's been another sort of alternative direction opened. It was in Berdyansk, and then there was another one in obviously in Bakhmut and that sort of area. I don't know about Berdyansk, but I certainly profoundly disagree with lots of analysts who were saying that Bakhmut direction wasn't worth of even like defending and so on. It's first of all, it's never possible to make a right decision, and the decision is in the hands of president of the country and commander-in-chief, who have better information than anyone else about like details. And all decisions in a military and operational theater are made when you have all details, because lack of some details may get you to some completely different decision. But what we know for sure from our sort of outside knowledge is that certainly Russians wanted to take all Donbass, and they still do. They still do, and this is their goal. This is their main goal: is to basically occupy the whole Donetsk oblast. And after that, there could be scenarios. So they can continue, or they can say, okay, we reached goals of our special military operation, and then announce the readiness for some ceasefire or some negotiations and so on and so on. And I could tell you that like there's been a million politicians around the world, if they said that, they would jump on that immediately and say, yeah, that's great, let's do negotiations and let's do a ceasefire, without understanding that that's basically playing Russian game. In this case, it would be because they would first of all announce the victory on this so-called special military operation, and that would destroy the whole messaging meaning of the coalition. What they would do, because the main thing which coalition is doing is sending a message to the world that the aggression like that cannot win. So essentially it means that it needs to lose. And Russians would certainly play that a lot, but then they would buy time to recover, to build up new capabilities, to do lessons learned analysis, to analyze Ukraine more and more and more, and build a stronger force, and then hit us with much harder sort of magnitude, and that would be like devastating. So we could, and of course, what I probably should mention from the very beginning, there are cities in Donbass currently, as we speak, which are trying to live more or less normal life, like Kramatorsk, like Slaviansk, Konstantinivka, and so on, which would be wiped if we let Russians to go through. So basically, we can see the logic behind the decision to kind of wear out Russian forces in Bakhmut. But at the same time, some people saying, well, I mean, that sort of dispersed our forces, and then these forces, didn't achieve the goal. Now, let's assume we achieved the goal in counteroffensive. Let's assume we get to the Azov Sea during this period of counteroffensive. Fine. So we would liberate Melitopol, but then we would lose Donbass. What's better? Is this like the best course of action? Is that like what these guys would tell us? Like this is what they prefer? And of course, the ultimate decision is for the president and for Zaluzhny. And the thing is that what we need to know is that during the planning process, during the discussion of the plans, there is always difference in opinions. So there's absolutely always difference in opinions. So Churchill, if you read the history of World War II, always had, like, lots of times he had difference with his allies, with US, with France, even inside his cabinet. There's been constantly disagreements. But then they made decision, and as soon as decision is made, everybody worked towards that goal. And not then saying, oh, we told you, you should have made that, because the decision is sometimes not clear to everybody. And we need to respect the logic of their decision. And their logic for this decision is very clear. So I think that, again, that gets us to the point of like to do accusations and to say, oh, we told you not to do that. It's a wrong course of action. We need to send a message to our allies and to analysts and so on and so on. Don't do this. Don't spread these kind of discussions about some people doing something wrong, particularly in a public sort of sphere, because again, until we win, we will be getting this campaign through the disagreements. In general, including this is just a fate of humanity. People tend to disagree with each other. There's nothing wrong about this, but then somebody needs to take responsibility and make certain decisions.
Well, I'm under the impression also that one of the key factors was America's insistence on sacrificing many soldiers to achieve a breakthrough, while Ukraine said that it's impossible for us to throw so many soldiers without air support, without long-range missiles. Is my view correct?
Well, I mean, we read about that in an article, and we knew before. There's been already some information in the public domain before that, yes, indeed, they were saying that, yes, it's going to be a costly campaign, but you need to go through this because, that's how you win. The only thing I can just draw your attention to is that there hasn't been any single plan what to do after counteroffensive. And the expectation that suddenly Putin becomes rational and says, oh my God, what I started, it's not going to end up well, let's do negotiations. It's totally fanciful, like completely. I mean, because it's not the way how he thinks. And whoever understands the Russian basically strategy, they all understand that Russia here is not to negotiate. I mean, they go until the end. And the question is, what is the end? And our job is to make the end their failure, and that's so they cannot move anymore. Basically, that's where the problem was, that because even now we can see some interviews of the representatives of White House administration just recently, and they were saying that, well, our job is to make Ukraine strong, and our strategy is for 2024 to make Ukraine strong, that it still can fight against Russia, which is great, and we're really appreciating that. And then, like, either Russians are going to negotiations acceptable to Ukraine, or they see that this is a much stronger country. And that's fantastic. The problem is that Russians are not going to go for negotiations. We know that already, especially negotiations acceptable to Ukraine, because And it's very simple, because the only way Russia would agree on something is that if Ukraine stops existing. Where is the, where are we supposed to find the common ground on in that sort of respect? Or even territorial concessions, which some people suggesting, like in serious press, like the serious analytical people suggesting that there are territorial concessions. The territorial concessions are not going to stop the war, and they will not be able to stop the war in the future. So they just serve no purpose whatsoever. They actually making things worse, because they are emboldening. They would be emboldening, like theoretically speaking, they would be emboldening to Putin. They would be reinforcing his opinion, because he would be saying, you see, I'm actually gaining, and the world is okay about that, so let's just move on, let's just move further, and so on. So honestly, I mean, it's just sometimes shocking to see that sort of smart people with a fantastic education, with amazing knowledge about the world's history, and not understanding these things, and keep on going over and over and over for years, all this mantra about, like, okay, if the war goes wrong, let's do negotiations, and let's just do some concessions, and just stop. It's just like crazily naive, and sometimes I'm reading this and I'm just speechless, to be honest.
Well, what's your advice for these people that think about negotiations, that think it's an adequate solution? And what do we need to convince these people that this does not work?
Well, they need to understand that negotiations is the two-way street, and it's basically when you have both parties wanting to end the war. If Ukraine actually wants end of the war, probably more than anything else in the world, Putin doesn't want the end of the war. And if they press Ukraine to negotiations, I don't think it's going to happen anyway. But also, why they support Ukraine? So basically, what is their position? Their position is to send a message to future historians that the wars like that are doomed to fail, because the Western coalition and basically is able to protect the law. And even if they don't participate directly in the war, they are capable of enabling the other country to defend itself. So they spent like over whatever hundreds of billions of dollars for that purpose, and that purpose makes sense, because indeed we will see many, many different wars destroying the whole world eventually, if that doesn't happen, right? Now, these concessions and these kind of sort of negotiated based ending or concession based ending of the war, first of all, is not going to end the war, but secondly sends a horrible message to historians, like basically saying that actually even the Western coalition cannot stop this war. I mean, nobody can stop. So if a very bold and evil power, I mean, which goes against the law, suddenly with their own truth, which they build up, and they're trying to kind of send it through propaganda to the rest of the world, if they decide to invade the country, they will invade the country. And any Western group will not be able to do anything with this, and then we will see wars popping up all around the world, which actually we see already. It's just starting.
That brings us to the next important point about the support of the Western coalition, where it stands right now. The Washington Post article had quoted a high-ranking Ukrainian military official that said that they have stopped asking for more tanks and fighting vehicles, despite intensely lobbying for them in the first year of war, because they were relevant last year. So basically, the idea is that the West was so late with the help that it was already irrelevant. So why is this happening, and where does Ukraine stand right now with the tools that it needs to win the war?
We certainly can see right now that the war turns much more asymmetrical and basically tech than it used to be. So the use of drones, for example, FPV drones, like first-person view drones, which people guide through the VR glasses, those drones can carry items, like grenades or mines or just custom-made explosive devices, which then will damage the equipment, if not destroy, but damage, and some do destroy. And these drones obviously are worth, like, I don't know, hundreds of dollars or sometimes thousands of dollars, depending on the size. And the equipment is millions of dollars, but more importantly, it's like many months of work and many months of labor, man hours, to make. So essentially, we see some asymmetrical solutions, which actually Ukraine pioneered in the beginning, like in the end of 2022. And I remember the analysis which we did with the Kherson campaign, and we listened to the records of the of Russians which were intercepted and so on. And there's been a lot of the complaints about the drones, which Ukraine used at huge numbers. And partly the success of Kherson was due to pioneering of these FPV drones back then. But then Russians build up this capability very fast, and right now we see drones from both sides, and in some areas, Russians actually even prevail with their numbers. But the fact is that makes lots of other doctrines and equipment irrelevant. And indeed, like to have a lot of the equipment and machinery which is moving, and then suddenly, attacked by the swarms of those drones, and then that's it. You have like millions of dollars wasted. I think that we still going to use that because this development of the war in terms of the FPV is still in the beginning. We will see some substantial changes in this sort of sphere. And the biggest question is that can we maintain the leadership, or at least establish the leadership, and then maintain the leadership, technological leadership in that respect, because that's a key to the victory. So the theory of the victory will go through the technology.
So what is the solution right now? Is it simply to produce more drones? Because I'm hearing complaints that the Russians have started mass production of FPV drones and that Ukrainians are lagging behind in terms of numbers. So is the solution just to make more, or what is it?
That's partial solution. Yes, we need to make more, and then we need to make better models, and then we need to address the issue of the EW and counter EW, and then we need to train more people, because again, technology is not yet the victory. A victory is the victory comes with some sort of prevalence in capabilities, and this could be symmetric, it could be asymmetric. In our case, it must be asymmetric because again, I don't think we're going to win the war with Russia by old school sort of methods. And counteroffensive biggest lesson, as you remember, we started the conversation that you need to learn the lessons of the counteroffensive, except not to avoid accusing, to avoid like despair, but actually do the lessons learned analysis, and to analyze if the biggest conclusion of the counteroffensive is the days of the old school war where everything is based on armored vehicles, armored equipment, and so on. These days are over. They're gone, and they're not going to come back. So the days now are the critical capabilities would be in the sphere. We still need armored vehicles because we still need to deliver people, but they are not going to be sufficient. So they are like necessary, but not sufficient for the victory. What is actually even more necessary is the directed striking capability which FPV presents, and that's what we need to continue analyzing, and that's what we need to continue building. And there's many options what we can do there, but the critical thing is that no country has this capacity ready, so we can go to the warehouses and open up warehouses and see 1 million of drones waiting for. No, there's no warehouse where the millions of drones. So we need to build them, and build them means that turn on the industry, allow the industry, and there are factories which are building them, and in Ukraine as well. And we need to somehow pair up with our Western partners to build them together. That's the most critical question to our which enables the victory.
Regarding technologies, some of the complaints of Ukrainian side in the Washington Post article was the lack of long strike capabilities for Ukraine, and also continued lack of air support. Where does Ukraine's potential stand right now?
There has been clear. There's been an approval to start counteroffensive without that. So of course, like we knew that F-16s are not going to come by the time that counteroffensive is supposed to be completed. So it's not like we can say Well, first of all, yes. What is unfair comment is that, oh, Ukraine needed to fight as the West, etc., etc. Nothing happened in that counteroffensive like the West used to fight. So first of all, the West didn't use to fight with that amount of minefields protected by that amount of drones. And secondly, the West never fought without the air support. So to say that what Ukraine hasn't done is didn't read the book correctly is, of course, it would be unfair, and it would be unfair from methodological perspective. Like it would be unfair comment. But at the same time, we cannot just sit and blame partners because, again, first of all, we went to this together. It was a joint decision to start it. So it was like a clear expectation of Ukrainian command to do that, and to expect some results out of it. And secondly, again, the mistakes is a characteristics of every long war. So we just need, again, let's not get into let's get into a sober analysis and sober conclusions and better next counteroffensive rather than something else. Regarding the lack of air support, well, I mean, we're working on this, right? So there's been a preparation of the pilots and so on and so on. So of course we need air support. And of course we are frustrated by the fact that the decision on F-16s was made so late, and only after a very, very long and very, exhausting advocacy campaign, which was, there's been lots of people participated with very little hopes, that it actually is going to be done. But okay, so the decision is made. Let's kind of implement it as soon as. Same thing with the long range items. If decision has been made to give some number of ATACMS, let's just give them enough that they can actually make difference.
When we spoke last in November, you said that Ukraine's victory depends on the West finally deciding to back the victory as they have the technology and funds to prevail over Russia, but somehow Ukraine is not getting it yet. Well, recent events in the US Congress and a probable Trump victory and also slumping support levels, they have aroused many debates of how strong support for Ukraine is. Can you give us your perspective on where things stand?
We can only see when that happens. Unfortunately, there's a lot of question marks there, and of course, it's surprising, to see how, and disheartening in some cases, to see some of the senators which were traditionally supporting Ukraine and then just saying out loud in TV, saying, "Well, until the U.S.-Mexico border is addressed, we're not supporting Ukraine." How you can say that? How you can just generally say that, because this is, like, first of all, two very distinctly different questions. Secondly, how would you then explain deaths of Ukrainians which were waiting for that equipment and which didn't arrive because you've been like playing your political games? So that sort of, I cannot find a logical explanation, and that's, of course, is very frustrating. However, what do we know is that there's a lot of Republicans which are not saying against the Ukrainian support. They are saying that they see that there's been a unfortunately, again, our topic, basically the whole our case has become a part of the political rivalry, and obviously this is dangerous, but I think that we can safely expect that the support will continue. Regarding President Trump, I don't know how to comment, because it's a very it's a sort of a zone where you can really, like, you cannot build any forecasts. But regarding generally the overall Republican community, I mean, we clearly see there's a massive group which supports Ukraine, and it's very strong, and it's probably even majority if we take the Congress, still. So I think that as soon as they pass through some of their process, we'll get what we need. The question is that sometimes some of them are asking questions which actually, honestly speaking, we also would like to figure out, and some of that is like, what's the expected end game, what is the strategic plan, and so on. And I don't know whether some of these people are asking these questions because it's again a political kind of process, or they actually want to know. But yes, I mean, finding out the strategy and actually clarifying it and clarifying the final like strategic sort of campaign plan, it would, a theory of victory and so on in these jointly, it would certainly help, you know, because what we don't want to happen is that the help is sort of continuing but without hopes for success. That's what we certainly don't want to happen. We do need to calculate success.
Okay, and finishing up, a recent Wall Street Journal article said, citing Western diplomats, that they expect that 2024 will be a year where the front line does not move, where Ukraine prepares its resources to make a strike in 2025. What is your assessment of what?
I definitely don't want to make these forecasts because there's absolutely no data. There's scenarios and these scenarios. So, for example, if nothing comes as equipment, then of course the front line will move, and not in our favor. If the assistance stops, I mean, obviously it's going to be moving. Sadly, you know, because we cannot expect a miracle. If we don't have things to fight with, Russians will be gearing up their production, and they would be pushing through. But if there is a lot of equipment, and if we build up some technological advancements, you know, and then it would be moving in the other direction, then we would be actually winning, because we would be able to destroy their positions and go through the minefields and actually create this sort of counteroffensive, not necessarily in the same operational direction, but maybe somewhere else. But we'll be able to destroy their positions, you know, and then they will run like they always do, and they will retreat like they did before. And yes, there potentially could be some equilibrium between the sides, so that there's not much happening in terms of the territory. So everything is possible. Let's again, as we often say among some of the people in the analytical community, it doesn't make sense to waste time on building forecasts. Let's actually build them. You know, sorry, let's actually build that reality ourselves. Let's try to influence the situation and actually condition some of these scenarios and make them happen.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Alya, and nice to talk to you as always, and look forward.